The Kimono Tailor by Eric Smith. The tailor was growing old. He did not fully admit this to himself. After all, he could still wink at a pretty girl and work most of the day. His small town had always been his home. He had always been a tailor. He learned the trade from his father, who in turn had learned it from his father. The tailor was the first generation to make fancy things. During the last 20 years, he had begun to specialize in the making of lovely kimonos. They were of simple sort. The women of the town, whose husbands had professions, ones that had made more money than their mothers had known, were his usual customers. The silk he used for these kimonos was good, but not great. He purchased it from a worm farmer who lived just outside of town. The tailor's life was a complicated grind. He had little room for error in his life. He constantly had to take into account expenses and profits. He never had time for fun things and a family of his own. He had not taught tailoring to anyone except himself. It was not easy pleasing his customers, nor his property owner, nor his suppliers. The customers were often asking for extra qualities for their kimonos. He knew they could not afford these. He was not about to add cost to his supplies. His suppliers already withheld the extra nice materials. He would have liked to acquire these, but for nearly the same price he paid for the materials that he currently used in his work. He seemed most fair to him to have it this way. He gave the suppliers his business, did he not? Better buttons and such should come to him. Buttons were a continuous frustration. One could not get enough useful buttons, no matter how hard one tried. The tailor never made enough money to own his shop. His whole life he had given a good portion of his earnings to his property owner. He did not like the property owner. He did not stop hating him, though, when he had reached 45 years old. There was one time of year that the tailor did something different from his demanding routine. He traveled by foot to the nearby city and sold 5 specially made luxury kimonos. These were very nice fashions. They were not the best, but still could command a greater price than any in his town could pay for them. Winter was the time he went to the bigger city because that was when they had held their annual festival. At the festival, he was able to meet women who appreciated his finer kimonos. Their husbands were able to afford these better items because they lived in a bigger city that had more commerce. This year he would take 3 blue, 1 yellow, and 1 red luxury kimono. He packed the 5 kimono carefully in his shoulder bag. He dressed warmly, combed his beard, and drank hot wine before sitting out to the bigger city. On his long walk, he thought about things. He grew tired this year and had to rest several times during the trek. He realized he was aging. He had no one to show his craft of tailoring. There was no one to pass on his knowledge and his father's knowledge. Maybe he would have to budget for an apprentice, someone who could one day even make these trips to the bigger city. He had already gotten a late start on his journey. The frequent rests made it apparent that he would soon be traveling in the dark of night. Others were not about. The few who traveled in carts were of a higher station in life. It would not be appropriate to ask for a ride. This was the way of the Japanese culture in the years between 1800 and 1900. As the evening turned to black, the tailor began to remember some great game he played as a child. This particular portion of the road was ancient and strewn with decaying trees. The wind began to whistle through the bark and the blackbirds called. The temperatures dipped. The cold got colder. The old man remembered the game. It was by sense and instinct, with a small mixture of lore and prejudice, that he spontaneously began playing the old childhood game. He skipped off the road and began darting between trees. His body moved as if he needed to evade something that was pursuing him. He began to hide. He went further and further off the road to where the dead trees grew thicker and the blackbird's call echoed. He skipped a light dance with his satchel of colorful kimonos dangling at his side. He dashed from tree to tree, hunching his body for physical secrecy, wincing into the dark and almost at times giggling. As he moved out from one dense grouping of trees across an open vista toward another shelter of branches, one's ever closer to the big city, they discovered him. The two brigands cut him down to the snow with fast swings of their stolen swords. They pulled violently on the satchel of beautiful kimonos until the luxury items became their own, if so damaged. The tailor lay in the white snow. Having lost the game, he bled a red blood, too great an amount, across the wet, powdery blanket beneath him.